I want you to look at a photograph. It is not a famous one. It is a grainy, sepia-toned image of a municipal building in a mid-sized American city, taken around 1880. At first glance, it is beautiful, typical of that grand, over-engineered Victorian era. But as you linger, something begins to feel wrong. Attached to the side of this civic structure is a tower. It is slender, ornate, rising hundreds of feet into the air, topped with a copper-clad dome and a needle-like spire that seems to pierce the very fabric of the sky. If you asked a historian today what that tower was, they would give you a very comfortable, very rational answer. They would call it a standpipe, a pressure tower designed to maintain the hydraulic flow of the city's water system. It is an explanation that closes a door. It makes sense. It is boring. And most importantly, it stops you from asking more questions. But here is where the logic begins to fracture. A functional water pipe is a cylinder. It requires a vertical shaft and a maintenance door. It does not require hand-carved stone gargoyles at every landing. It does not require narrow, arched lancet windows positioned at precise intervals that serve no purpose for light or ventilation. And it certainly does not require a spire made of high-conductivity metal oriented within 5 degrees of true astronomical east. I am not just talking about one building in Philadelphia or a single structure in Paris. I am talking about a global pattern. Between 1840 and 1910, hundreds of these identical towers appeared in every major city on Earth. From the fog-drenched streets of London to the newly built boulevards of Chicago. From the colonial outposts in Hanoi and Saigon to the heart of the Russian interior in Kazan. They appeared almost overnight, attributed to architects who had no previous experience with such complex geometry, and built with a level of precision that our modern construction firms struggle to replicate today. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they began to vanish. Between 1895 and 1920, a silent, coordinated purge swept the globe. Thousands of these towers were torn down, not because they were unstable, not because they were obsolete. In many cases, they were destroyed and replaced by nothing at all, leaving a jagged gap in the city's skyline and an even larger gap in our collective memory. Welcome to Cipher History. Today, we are not looking at what they built. We are looking at why they had to destroy it. We are uncovering the global frequency matrix, a world of free, wireless energy that was unplugged to make way for the world we live in today. A world where you are a customer, not a participant. Before we continue, look at the old buildings in your own city. Look at the rooftops. Look for the scars where something used to be attached. Once you see the pattern, you realize that history isn't a straight line. It's a crime scene. And someone has been very busy cleaning up the evidence. Let us look closer at the coordination problem. In the mid-19th century, the world was still a vast, disconnected place. The first transatlantic telegraph cable was a fragile, flickering thread. Steamships took weeks to cross the oceans. There was no internet, no global architectural database, no real-time consultation between continents. And yet, the towers were identical. If you compare the water towers of Bucharest with the bell towers of Melbourne and the administrative annexes of San Francisco, the proportional relationships are uncanny. The ratio of the base to the spire, the placement of the decorative bands, the specific use of red brick layered with white limestone. It is as if they were all following a single master blueprint, a blueprint that does not exist in any official archive. Historians tell us this was merely architectural fashion. They claim that pattern books circulated among architects, spreading the Gothic and Romanesque styles like a virus. But I have spent months scouring those 19th century pattern books. I have found designs for cottages, for churches, for grand estates. I have never found the technical specifications for these towers. Because they weren't buildings. They were components. Consider the materials. These structures were almost always constructed with a core of red brick, high in iron oxide, and capped with copper, brass, or gold-leafed iron. In modern electrical engineering, we call this a conductor-insulator arrangement. When you place a highly conductive spire hundreds of feet into the atmosphere, you aren't just decorating the skyline. You are creating a bridge. Our atmosphere is an ocean of energy. The ionosphere is a sphere of plasma, a massive battery that surrounds the Earth. Every second, lightning strikes the planet 100 times, maintaining a constant electrical potential between the ground and the sky. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is basic physics. In the 1890s, Nikola Tesla attempted to tap into this atmospheric energy at Wardenclyffe. He wanted to give the world free, wireless power. He was silenced, his funding cut, his laboratory destroyed. But the evidence suggests that Tesla wasn't discovering something new. He was trying to reactivate a system that was already standing. The towers were the receivers. They were the antennas of a global grid that harvested the ether, the ambient energy of the air itself. This is why the windows were so narrow and specifically angled. They weren't for people to look out of. They were resonant cavities, designed to vibrate at specific frequencies. But if this is true, where are the wires? The answer is, they didn't need them. In a resonant system, power is transmitted through the earth and the air. The very ground you walk on was once a conductor. The fountains in the center of old cities weren't just for aesthetics. Water is a magnificent conductor. These fountains served as the grounding points for a city-wide wireless circuit. But a system that provides energy for free is a system that cannot be taxed. It is a system that cannot be metered. It is a system that prevents a small group of people from controlling the lifeblood of modern civilization. And so, the decision was made. The grid had to go. Wait until you see how they did it. Because the destruction of the towers wasn't just a physical act. It was a psychological one. They didn't just tear down the structures. They tore the knowledge of how they worked out of our minds. How do you make a global civilization forget its most important technology? You don't do it all at once. You do it through a process of recategorization. Starting around 1900, the narrative began to shift. In municipal records, the towers were no longer referred to as power stations or atmospheric collectives. They became aesthetic landmarks or obsolete infrastructure. To justify their removal, the newly formed energy monopolies, the men who owned the coal mines and the burgeoning electrical wire factories, needed a cover story. This is the era of the Great Fire. Have you ever noticed how almost every major city in the world suffered a catastrophic fire between 1850 and 1910? Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, Toronto, Vladivostok. The official stories blame a kicked lantern or a stray cigarette. But look at the aftermath photos. Brick and stone buildings, materials that do not burn, are reduced to fine white ash. The towers, the very structures that could have provided the power to save these cities, were always the first to be cleared away in the name of urban renewal. But for the towers that survived the fires, a more subtle method was used. The World's Fairs. Between 1851 and 1915, these expositions were held in cities like St. Louis, Chicago, and Paris. They were marketed as celebrations of human progress. But if you look at the maps, these fairs were built directly on top of pre-existing grand architectural complexes. They were temporary cities made of plaster and wood, designed to be demolished after 6 months. Why? Because it allowed the controllers to say, "See these magnificent high-tech buildings with their wireless lights and massive towers? We just built them out of trash for fun. They aren't real. They aren't permanent." When the fairs ended, they dynamited the structures. They didn't just destroy the buildings, they destroyed the public's belief that such architecture was even possible. They convinced us that we were the ones moving forward, while they were busy burying the peak of human achievement. By 1920, the silence was almost total. The copper spires were melted down for the war effort. The stone bases were repurposed for the foundations of bank buildings. The generation that knew how to tune the towers passed away, and their children were sent to schools where the ether was removed from the physics textbooks. We were told that the light bulb was a miracle of the 20th century. We were told that the telegraph was the pinnacle of communication. But the photographs don't lie. They show cities from 1860 already glowing with a light that had no visible wires. They show a world that was more connected, more elegant, and more advanced than the one we were forced to build in its place. So why does this matter to you, sitting here in the present? Because the grid never truly went away. The locations of those old towers, the specific nodes on the Earth's ley lines where they stood, are the same locations being used today for 5G masts and high-frequency arrays. The matrix is being rebuilt, but this time, it's not designed to give you energy. It's designed to harvest your data. The frequency hasn't changed. Only the intent has. Look around you today. We are told we live in the information age, a pinnacle of human achievement. We carry supercomputers in our pockets and beam data across the void. But we are also more tethered than ever before. We are slaves to a meter, victims of a monthly bill, and prisoners of a grid that can be switched off by a single hand at a central desk. The towers were more than just power plants. They were symbols of sovereignty. When energy is free, when it is pulled from the very air we breathe, the power of the central state evaporates. You cannot control a population that is not dependent on you for its survival. This is the true reason for the erasure. The purpose unknown designation in the archives isn't a failure of history. It is a success of propaganda. They wanted you to look at those magnificent spires and see nothing but ornament. They wanted you to see the former administrative annexes and think of bureaucracy, not frequency. But the stones are still there. If you walk through the older districts of your city, stop and look at the foundations. Look for the massive, mortarless blocks of granite that predate the brickwork above them. Look for the arched windows that are now half buried beneath the pavement, as if the ground itself rose up to swallow the evidence of a great flood. The silence is deafening, but it is not absolute. It vibrates in the background of every sepia-toned photograph. It resonates in the geometry of the cathedrals they tell us were built by peasants with hammers and chisels. The frequency matrix was unplugged, but the wires of the earth remain. We are standing on the ruins of a global masterpiece, living in the basement of a palace we no longer recognize. The question is no longer, what were the towers? The question is, what else have they made us forget? And more importantly, what would happen if we learned how to turn them back on? History is not what happened. It is what they want you to believe happened. But for those with eyes to see, the pattern is everywhere. The lights are off, but the circuit is still waiting. My name is Cipher History. Thank you for venturing into the erased century with me. If this investigation resonated with you, if you've noticed these ghost towers in your own city, share your evidence in the comments below. Let us piece the map back together, one spire at a time. Don't just watch history, decode it. Until the next truth reveals itself, keep looking up.